would like to welcome you, Amy Goodman. It's a pleasure to have you here on the phone. You're calling us from New York City, and I'm on the line here from beautiful Chilmark, Massachusetts, vacation home to the Obama family and the Clinton family and the Kennedy family. We are very excited for your upcoming talk at the Catherine Cornell Theater in Vineyard Haven, which is coming up on Saturday, July 26th, and you'll be giving a talk and signing some books. I should actually also tell our listeners that while I'm having this talk here with Amy Goodman, she has much bigger fish to fry, but I think that's sort of the point of this whole thing is that while we may seem small and insignificant, we actually do matter. And even though Amy is, while she's talking on the phone to me, is dealing with major reporters being pulled out of Gaza and huge world events, she's taking the time to talk to humble Rob here at VVY on Martha's Vineyard, and which we greatly appreciate. But so I just wanted to maybe add that as a little.
Well,
context.
Rob, I just want to say WVVY is very important. Community radio is very important. We're really honored to broadcast on both TV and radio in Martha's Vineyard, VVY every day at noon, Monday to Friday, and also on public access TV, Martha's Vineyard Community Television, MVTV, Channel 13, every morning live 8 to 9 a.m., Monday through Friday. Community radio is so critical to getting out the voices of people who are not usually heard and giving access to people to do their own media all over this country. That is ultimately, I believe, what will save us, is people hearing a reflection of their communities that's actually accurate. Think about the corporate networks and what we get on the major networks, this small circle of pundits who know so little about so much, explaining the world to us and getting it so wrong. Mm-hmm. There is this great multiplicity of voices all over the country that really have been silenced. I mean, I really do think that those who care about war and peace, those who care about climate change, this absolutely critical subject, the fate of the planet, those who care about the growing inequality between rich and poor in the United States, are not a fringe minority, not even a silent majority, but the silenced majority, silenced by the corporate media, which is why we have to take it back. It's also the title of my latest book, The Silenced Majority. We write a column every week I do with my colleague Dennis Moynihan that appears in newspapers all over the country and on websites. And it's a kind of roadmap to independent voices.
And I heard you speak at the Zeiterion Theater in New Bedford, and you were able to somehow put in context where we were sitting, which was in the history of New Bedford, and where Frederick Douglass had lived and had traveled, and how he had escaped Mount Misery, which had particular resonance for me since I had a major head injury on Mount Misery and where I grew up.
On the eastern shore of Maryland?
No, I grew up in Lincoln, Massachusetts, and right next to a little hill called Mount Misery. And when I was 5 years old, I got stitches in my head falling at Mount Misery, and which was always sort of so poetic to me. And I will never forget the story that you told, and you were somehow able to make the slavery days and the current events and how ironic it was that Donald Rumsfeld now owns that property and where we were sitting right then and why community radio was important. And you were somehow able to draw these sort of topics from all over the place.
Well, I mean, that's a very important historic story. Frederick Douglass, the greatest abolitionist, who, yes, lived in New Bedford, and all through the Cape he spoke, how important it was, how significant that he was born, he was enslaved as a youth and a teenager. He was, because it might not surprise people to know he was a troublesome slave, he was brought to a place called Mount Misery that was owned by a guy named Ed Covey, who was a slave breaker, and that's why Frederick Douglass was brought to him, and he beat him and tortured him, but Frederick Douglass escaped and went north and changed the world. You know, he had the North Star newspaper, and when he came to New York, he took shelter in the printing press offices of David Ruggles, who was born a free black man in Connecticut. And I always thought it was so interesting that here was Frederick Douglass, who started the North Star newspaper, and David Ruggles, who had a press. These men saw media as their form of liberation, because information is power. And that property today on the eastern shore of Maryland, Mount Misery, is owned by Donald Rumsfeld. He bought it to be his vacation home. Right around the time of the Iraq War, when he was Secretary of War, to be near his friend Dick Cheney, the vice president. And, you know, I visited there and, you know, went to see if, in fact, this was true. But one of the things we do on Democracy Now! Is link the remarkable history of movements and people to what we see today, and also look to the future. Yeah. And it's such an honor to come to Martha's Vineyard and be able to connect with the community media that feels the same way. We don't have to agree on all issues, and the listeners and viewers who take in Democracy Now! On a regular basis, you can have all different views on every issue. But I think where we agree is that independent media is important. It's crucial. WVVY is part of a sacred chain in the United States. It's independent radio and public access TV stations and public radio and public television. That's essential to the functioning of a democratic society.
Very well put. Those are. Now I remember exactly why I was so inspired at the Zeiterion Theater. Now, and I was wondering in preparing for our little talk here, because I know that you know your history and you're a history buff of sorts, and is there anything significant perhaps here on the Vineyard that we can because as I mentioned in the introduction, you know, this is somehow the vacation home of many presidential families, and sometimes there's a big spotlight on the Vineyard, and this small little island, and it has occurred to me that perhaps we could be some sort of a model for the world, and maybe even a testing ground for new ideas and new ways of functioning as a community and a society. And I'm wondering are you looking at this Vineyard trip, and do you look at the history of Martha's Vineyard at all when you prepare for something like this?
So when I come to a place, which I'm really looking forward to on July 26th, coming to Martha's Vineyard, I like it to look into the history of the place. And one of the things I noticed looking at the Martha's Vineyard Times is that the famous speech by Frederick Douglass, The Meaning of the 4th of July for the Negro, was reread at the Federated Church, where Douglass spoke in 1857. So Martha's Vineyard has a direct tie to Frederick Douglass, and that's very interesting because on this year's 4th of July, on July 4th, 2014, we ran James Earl Jones reading that remarkable speech, The Meaning of the 4th of July for the Negro. And I witnessed James Earl Jones actually doing this here in New York at the 92nd Street Y. It was part of the reading of Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States and a companion volume to it, People's Voices. where the great historian Howard Zinn, who summered on the Cape, unfortunately he died a few years ago, though his legacy and his remarkable people's historian approach lives on, has been performed all over this country, the many famous speeches in past history. So it was wonderful to be able to broadcast on WVVY on July 4th that speech that was actually reread on Martha's Vineyard. And again, Douglas spoke there in 1857.
Well, you learn something every day. That's very, very interesting. And I was wondering if I might ask you about the nature of these types of organizations. WVVY is an all-volunteer-run organization that gets by on a shoestring, and I've seen over the years from the beginning waves of enthusiasm and energy, and it's pretty palpable when you have the critical mass of people. Really, there's a lot of energy behind it, and it takes on its own steam, and then it wanes and it goes up and down. And I'm wondering if there might be any. I know that you can't wave a magic wand, and there's no simple solution.
Well, I can only say that people should not take community media for granted. It's a place where communities can make their own media and where you hear the voices of your community reflected. We need independent media in times of war and elections. We need independent media all the time, but we need a media that's not brought to us when we're covering war and peace by the weapons manufacturers. Mm-hmm. We need a media that's not brought to us by the drug companies and the insurance industry when we're covering health care. We need a media when we're covering climate change that's not brought to us by the oil, the gas, the coal companies, the nuclear companies. We need a media that is brought to us by listeners, viewers, readers who are deeply committed to independent media. Media and information is the oxygen of a democracy. You can't have a meaningful democracy if people aren't informed. And that's why WVVY is so important, and I hope that people get involved. That is the lifeblood of a community station, is the community's involvement, and it is precious all over the country. Noam Chomsky, who also summers on the Cape, has often said that when he goes into a community where there is community radio, he feels just a different response. People are more connected. They know more about what's going on. And, I really do think with the Internet, with global media, still it all starts where you live and being involved in your community. People face, on a local level, often what people are facing all over the country and around the world, and we can learn from each other. And that's why it's so important to bring out authentic voices on every issue. At Democracy Now!, and one of the things I'll be talking about at the Catherine Cornell Theater, or the auditorium on July 26th, is the journey that we just took this in the last few weeks to Germany, to Sweden, and ultimately to London, where we interviewed Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy, where he has gotten political asylum, but he fears if he steps foot out of the embassy, London authorities will arrest him, extradite him to Sweden, and then he'll be extradited to the United States, where he fears he could face massive charges for WikiLeaks. But what we've been looking at is really independent media. What we've been looking at is the nomads of the digital age. When we were in Berlin, we talked to Laura Poitras, who is now doing a film, who's a well-known filmmaker who made the first contact with Edward Snowden, and she and Glenn Greenwald then went to Hong Kong to meet with him as he gave them documents, because he was deeply concerned, this NSA contractor, about what he thought if Americans knew, they would do something about, and it was that the United States is becoming a surveillance state. And what does that mean? And how do people feel about that? If they feel fine, he's a believer in democracy, and he said, well, that would be up to the American people. But he thought people don't know the extent of the monitoring and the surveillance, and it's not only of people in this country, but people all over the world. I was just watching the World Cup in Brazil, and there in the stands I saw Dilma Rousseff, the president of Brazil, and she was sitting right near Angela Merkel, the German chancellor. Both of these women, both of these world leaders have been seriously surveilled and monitored by the United States, and they are allies. That's what came out in some of the documents that Edward Snowden released. So we went and talked to Laura Poitras, and then it went to Bonn, Germany, and broadcast, and folks can go back to democracynow.org and see these interviews. An interview with Sarah Harrison live there, and she's the young WikiLeaks editor who met up with Snowden in Hong Kong when she heard what was happening. And she and Julian Assange, who it's astounding, one of the most surveilled people on earth, holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy for 2 years. Assange and Harrison helped facilitate Edward Snowden going from Hong Kong. Well, he was trying to get to Latin America where he could get political asylum, but the U.S. pulled his passport on the way to Russia, which was just a transit point, so he couldn't leave Russia. Ultimately, he got political asylum there, but it's unbelievably cynical for U.S. government officials, politicians, pundits to say, look, he went to Russia because he's a Russian spy. He didn't even want to go to Russia. But when the government pulls your passport, the U.S. government, you're stuck wherever you land. And so he was forced down in Russia to stay in Russia. But the global debate that he has sparked, we've never seen anything like this. And we went from speaking to Sarah Harrison, who now, although she's a British citizen, she's concerned if she goes to Britain, she'll be arrested, so she's living in Germany. Laura Poitras is concerned, she's an American filmmaker, is concerned about what happens when she comes to the United States. She most recently came for a major journalism award, the George Polk Awards, along with Glenn Greenwald for their work on the release of these documents. And I was there when they came into the awards ceremony in New York. 3 days later, they would be named they would also win the Pulitzer Prize with the Washington Post and the Guardian newspapers. So their work is being recognized. And yet, Laura Poitras, for the last years, almost every time she's come in and out of the United States, she has been stopped. She's been stopped more than 40 times, seriously questioned. And these are American citizens. Glenn Greenwald was afraid to come into the country after releasing these documents of Edward Snowden. Ultimately, they did, and they weren't bothered. But these are the nomads of the digital age, and it's so important to document what they are reporting, the documents that are being released. Armies, states, governments rely on borders. The Internet knows no borders, and where this all goes, this clash of the old media with the new media and these modern-day nomads, well, we will see.
And if I'm understanding you correctly, in fact, we are linked, our little radio station, to a sacred network of the people that if this network doesn't keep on trying against all odds, then the people that abuse the power and the information
the chain will be broken, and that is that would be a tremendous shame. I think we have a responsibility to build independent media everywhere, to link up. The corporations have been globalizing for years. That has been their power. It's everyday people all over the world that are now beginning to globalize at the grassroots because of the Internet and because of outlets like WVVY and like it all over the country and around the world. It's also, by the way, why we have to keep the Internet open and free. The corporations, the video companies, the telecoms would like to privatize the Internet now, challenge what is known as network neutrality. And now that it is so profitable, set up a two-tiered system. We don't have that for telephones. Telephones are a public utility, and it's not based on whether you have a lot of money or a little money, whether I can hear you on the telephone. And that is what people are pushing for the Internet to be regulated as, that it was developed with public funds, and it is a public property, a global space that must be protected. And there is a whole media and democracy movement in this country and in countries around the world to protect this sacred space.
If you have a little bit more time, could I switch gears for a second and
yes,
throw
sure.
you a curveball here? So, as I think I mentioned to you, I'm sort of almost a comically unlikely person to be interviewing you, and could perhaps even be way out of my league, because I accidentally fell into community radio, simply because I've been a musician on this island for years, and the person that started the station asked me to do a show because she liked my music and my taste in music. And it wasn't until I'd been doing it for a while that I started realizing the significance of what I was involved with. And that is how I found myself interviewing the director of Connecting for Change, which is how I found myself listening to you at the Zeitarian Theater. And the reason why we were the ones, because it was my engineer here, Elisha, and I were the ones who interviewed the director of the conference. The reason why we were the ones that got it was because we were the only ones that doing a call-in radio show, which is actually a call-in sports talk show, believe it or not. And the name of our show is called Let's Face Facts, Folks. And we use, it is mostly a sports talk show, but we use that as a jumping-off point for really any topic. It's kind of a lighthearted show, and I also do a music show, and which is leading to my question is, I've noticed that in Democracy Now!, which my carpentry crews that I work on faithfully listen to every day up on the roof, banging up the shingles, we got Amy Goodman on full blast up there, and I notice that you always have a music break of significant length, and you take careful attention to credit the artist, and the song selections are always very carefully made, it seems like. And I was just wondering how you see music playing a role in all of this.
Music and culture are critical. I mean, it's the universal language. We interview many musicians and do this whole series on art and resistance. But the music breaks, which originally were set up so stations could identify themselves, have become some of the most popular parts of Democracy Now!, and we air a lot of the music of independent musicians, that come to New York. They perform in our studio. And we have a lot of musicians who tune in to Democracy Now! And a lot of bands who tune in. And that makes a huge difference to us. I mean, people speak many different languages. It might be a specific language like English or Arabic or Spanish or Hebrew or Russian. Who knows, right? But also there's the language of music. And in these weeks, there's a big Seeger Fest, for example, in New York, to remember Pete Seeger, who died at the age of 94, a few months after his wife Toshi died. They were about to celebrate their 70th anniversary, amazingly enough. But, we've been talking to Pete for years as he, talks about the influences on his music and the role of music, the ways that it can galvanize and touch people that almost nothing else can. Pete told the story of how he was at Highlander Center, which is also a place Rosa Parks was, where people, black and white together, learn to organize, strategically organize and challenge injustice. Pete was there at a point where he was developing, he had taken this old folk tune, We Will Overcome, and was sort of transforming it into We Shall Overcome. And Dr. King came to the Highlander Center in Tennessee. And he heard Pete for the first time singing "We Shall Overcome," and word has it, as he left the Highlander Center and he was in his car, he said to the person he was driving with, that's a very catchy tune. And it becomes the anthem of the civil rights movement, "We Shall Overcome." Billy Bragg from Britain, singing out around labor songs, challenging the state, Tom Morello. And all the different musicians who come to Democracy Now! To talk about their music. In fact, as we speak, Michael Franti was just calling, and he's always been a great advocate of independent media. He has a great song called Listener-Supported Radio, among other things. But, it's often for independent musicians, independent media is the place that their work gets out. It's not part of, the system of commercial radio stations and what it takes to be played there. It's not a pay-for-play system. It is about quality music and the integrity of the musician. So I think music is a key part of what we do.
Do you have any? What would be some music? Somebody, an artist that you loved when you were younger, and you still love them, and you can always go back to them. What are some of your classic jams for Amy Goodman?
What do you mean?
For me, I'll always love. Well, the Beatles is an easy one, but
fantastic.
Are there any ones that, then I have particular bands that influence me at just the right time, like the Minutemen, for instance, or Fugazi, are there any particular bands that maybe?
Well, I love all forms of music. I grew up playing classical flute. Then I came to just love jazz. And, of course, then folk is fantastic, from Joan Baez to Bob Dylan to Bruce Springsteen, who also tunes into Democracy Now!, and, of course, Pete Seeger, Joni Mitchell, Judy Collins, and then the musicians of today, Ani DeFranco, and but the great jazz artists. We just lost Charlie Hayden, great jazz musician. Ornette Coleman is who he played with, and he was Charlie. Would speak out against authoritarian dictatorships, performing in Portugal against what was happening in Africa, and risked his career to do that. And whatever medium we are in, whatever we do, I think it's sort of looking out on the vast ocean through different portals and through different little windows. And I just love all forms of music. It just touches me. I love the Somali-Canadian rap artist, musician, Kanan. He came to our studios and performed, and I was so deeply moved. There's just many different musicians. Buffy St. Marie, I also thoroughly enjoy.
Yeah. No, that's all. Just a few names. I'm the same way. I think there's good music in all genres, and lately I've been stuck on Ethiopian jazz from the early 70s.
Wow.
As being just the best music I've ever heard.
Fela Kuti. I went to Fela's shrine in Nigeria, and Fela and his son Femi and Sean, they're all Yusuf Islam, former Cat Stevens. I just went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony where he performed, and last time he couldn't even get a visa to come into this country as he was critical of the United States. Bruce Springsteen was there, and the E Street Band was being honored as well. There's just so many musicians that really touch me.
I can't tell you how grateful I am for your time, and it's just such an honor to talk to you, Amy. I feel like I don't I could go on.
Well, and I can go on about the musicians, everyone from Odetta. It was my great honor to know her, to Nina Simone, who every time I hear her, she rips my heart out.
Oh, my God.
So, it could go on. But also, dealing with the issues all over the world. It's so important that we can, each day on WVVY at noon, bring you these stories of people speaking for themselves or telling their stories until they can tell their own. I am so looking forward to coming to Martha's Vineyard, to being with folks, and just a few of the details. We're going to be doing a few things there.
Yep.
Let's see, we're starting at 5:30. We'll be doing, I think it's 5 o'clock.
Yes.
We'll be doing a reception at the Beach Plum Inn for folks, and they can go to democracynow.org, and you can get tickets there. It's a 5 o'clock reception and talk. Really looking forward to meeting folks there in Menemsha. Then there is a 7 o'clock talk at the Catherine Cornell Theater. And one thing I haven't talked about is what an honor it is to be introduced by Charlene Hunter-Gault. I mean, her work, her coverage on every issue, and specifically on South Africa, what an honor it is to spend time with her in Martha's Vineyard. So I should have said that the very first, but I'm really looking forward to being with Charlene Hunter-Gault, and she'll be at the reception and at the talk at 7 o'clock. So I can't wait to come on out and celebrate WVVY. So I really look forward to seeing folks, and tune in to 93.7 FM, not only every day at noon for Democracy Now!, but for all of the shows, including yours, Rob. Tune in to Martha's Vineyard Community TV, Channel 13. We broadcast every morning at 8 o'clock. Also, the ACLU of Massachusetts is sponsoring this, so that should be very interesting. So I just really look forward to a wonderful public gathering. That's July 26th. At the Catherine Cornell Theater over on, 54 Spring Street in Vineyard Haven.
Well, I can't speak for anyone else on the island, Amy, but we're going to welcome you with open arms.
Well, can't wait to see you again, Rob, and to see everyone. So July 26th, it's a celebration of independent media. Be there.
Well, thank you so much for your time again, Amy, and
Thanks,
up on
Rob.
those headlines, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Can't wait.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.